This epigraph reads, "Any fool can get into an ocean, but it takes a goddess to get out of one." Jack Spicer. She stands on the shore looking at the light reflected off each rippled wave, looking at the terns, 5 of them, dipping their beaks into the wet sand, chasing the waves back to the ocean, only to run up the beach again. She walks forward, looking at her toes as they meet the white foam, noticing the coldness of the water. She walks further into the water, looking at the pelican dive deeply, fish caught, flight take off. A dog runs into the water, chasing the waves. He turns around and runs back to the beach. She does not. She walks and walks and walks until there is no more walking. He calls out to her, but she is not there. He waits and waits, but she doesn't come home for dinner. He waits some more. Then he leaves the house to find her. She is not wake-walking the neighborhood alone, as she often did, insomnia, and so he calls the police. 2 officers come over and nod sincerely as he tells them about his wife's disappearance. They can imagine how upset he is, they tell him. But women, especially those like his wife, often did this. As they are leaving, one officer, the older one, puts a hand on his shoulder and tells him not to expect her back, ever. It should have been that she could not breathe, but that did not happen. It should have been that there was some struggle or some drowning, but that did not happen. As the kelp laced through her fingers and intertwined with her hair, she began to remember. Her first memory was of holding her breath. She had held her breath for so long, so very long. He wondered what the officer meant. What kind of woman did his wife resemble? He went to their bedroom and looked through her things. They could have been anyone's things, not a journal, a scrap of paper, a photograph, a sales receipt. He opened her jewelry box, pearl earrings, a pearl necklace, her closet tidy, her clothes all white, blue, green, all the color of sea glass. She walked through the wall of water, feet touching the soft sand, hands gliding beside her, rippling the water around her. She could hear nothing, but kept breathing, no longer holding her breath. Water filled her lungs, and she exhaled. She went to touch her ears, as she often did when she was troubled, but they were no longer there. He could not remember how they had met. He could not remember their wedding or if there'd been a honeymoon. He could find no photos of them together. He could find no proof they'd lived a life or had lived a life outside of this house. This house with an ocean view. This house he was no longer sure was his house or her house or their house. This life he couldn't even say had happened. She walked through the forest of kelp, holding her hands steepled in front of her, the kelp fronds waving and parting as she walked through them. She watched her hands guide her through this forest. She watched as her fingers became something else. He couldn't remember his parents or school or friends. He could find no notebooks, no photographs, no scraps of anything that could tell him who he was before this time. And so he called the police again. The older officer returned and assured him that this often happened to husbands like him as well, and that he shouldn't ever expect to find himself either. Something was not right, but she couldn't say what it was. It wasn't that she no longer had ears or fingers or hands or feet. It wasn't that she no longer walked but swam. It wasn't that she no longer had hair that wasn't intertwined with kelp and seaweed. No, it wasn't any of those things, but something was missing. He stood on the rocks of the shore, not remembering ever touching the ocean with his bare feet. He took off his shoes, then his socks. He rolled up his pants. He walked to the shore, letting the expended waves lick his toes. Maybe he never bothered rolling up his pants. Maybe he simply walked into the waves, following the white bubbled trails. She sees something in the distance, but cannot be sure. She starts swimming out of the kelp toward what she cannot say. She has few words left, few pieces of language, but there is something familiar. And then she sees him. He squints through the seawater, his eyes burning, watching as something swims toward him. He is not meant to breathe this water, this salted, salty water, but he can no longer hold his breath. She comes to him as he remembered her, but never saw clearly. "I've been waiting for you." Her lips do not move, but still she tells him. Thank you.